Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and today we are going to go over my September wrap-up, which was huge. I read a lot of books, so for this I am going to direct you mostly to other videos where I gave you details about what I am talking about. But some of the books that I didn't talk about in other videos I will cover in this video. Hold up, I gotta interrupt right here. So I was uploading this video to YouTube and writing out the description, and I realized I left off 3 books in this wrap-up. So all of my statistic numbers are completely incorrect because for some reason I forgot books this month. I don't know. So I'm here to re-record the statistics part and then talk about the 3 books that I forgot to talk about. So in October I read 32 books. That was 1,312 pages, 354 average pages per book, and 377 average pages per day. 20 of the books were adult, 11 were young adult, and 1 was a children's book. As for authors, 20 of the authors were female, 10 were male. 1 was written by multiple authors of multiple genders, and 1 non-binary. I read 18 books physically. I read 12 books as electronic books on my Kindle, and 2 audiobooks. As for genres, this month was a very fantasy-heavy month, and this was the first fantasy-heavy month I've had the entire year. I read 13 fantasy books, 4 sci-fi novels, 4 just general fiction, 3 romances, 2 horror, 2 nonfiction, 1 historical fiction, 1 book of poetry, 1 mystery, and 1 graphic novel. Now, as always, when getting into the actual books I read, the first 10 books I read were part of my 1980s Century Challenge, or were part of my Century Challenge for the 1980s, and all 10 of those, not all featured here because at least 1 was an ebook, are available in a different wrap-up that I will link in the cards, which I think is over that way. The next section I am going into is my Goodreads challenge. One of my goals for the year is to read the most popular and the winner in the Goodreads challenge award categories. And at the beginning of September, I had 6 left that I need to finish before the end of the year, and out of those 6, I finished 3 of them. The first one was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This was the winner of romance and then just best overall book, I believe. This was very mediocre to me, but I'm not a fan of contemporary romance, so I gave this a 3-star. The next title was The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. This was historical fiction and highest rated. And again, it was okay. I also don't super particularly care for historical fiction, but this is one of those books where it was boring most of the way through and I didn't understand the plot, but once I got to the point where it was the end and I figured out where the hell they were going with the story, I realized that it's a very good book. This is the kind of book that I'm always afraid I'm gonna DNF something like this, and then the ending turns out as good as the ending was in this book. Like, this is my DNF fear, because this is a chunky book. This is like 600 something pages, and I normally was so bored that I would have DNF'd it, but the ending was amazing and totally worth not DNFing it. So this continues to be like one of the very, very extremely few shining examples of why I'm afraid to DNF books. The third book that I read was The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, and this is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which I also read The Handmaid's Tale this month. Now, The Handmaid's Tale came out in the 1980s, and then The Testaments came out in 2019, so it's been 30-something years since, like, between the two books. So that's like a big jump. A lot of people, I noticed, said that they didn't care for The Testaments as much as The Handmaid's Tale, and that they felt like it was written by a different author. I very much disagree with that. The main difference I found between The Testaments and The Handmaid's Tale is The Handmaid's Tale is from the perspective of a handmaid. And if you don't know the world of Gilead, where The Handmaid's Tale takes place, handmaids are, like, raped as part of a religious ceremony. So they are treated horribly. So if you're going to read a book from somebody in the same universe but not from the same horrible perspective that the handmaid is going through, it's not going to be as, like, intense and horrible. Women are altogether not treated well in this society, but the three women that we follow in the Testaments are treated better than a handmaid. It's still not well, but it's still better than a handmaid. So I think that's the main difference. Obviously, there's three perspectives in the Testaments while there's only one perspective in The Handmaid's Tale, and the fact that it's not from the life of a handmaid are the two major differences. But as far as the storytelling style goes, I think it is very similar, and it's obviously both books are written by Margaret Atwood. The Testaments isn't as, like, in your face moving, but I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was a very entertaining book. A dark, depressing, just my kind of style book. Next up, I typically talk about my book club book for the month, but this month my book club chose a book I had already read back earlier in the year, which was Daisy Jones and the Six. So I did not read a book with my book club this month. After that, we're gonna go to the three books that I read just because I wanted to read them. There was no other reason other than I wanted to read those books. The first one is Fates in Shadow by Deidre Drake. This is a paranormal romance, and this is the fourth book in this series. Deidre Drake is what is the word I'm looking for? She is a self-published author. You could buy her books on Amazon. They are fantastic. Not enough people read these, and if you like paranormal romance and you like reading about elves and vampires and Vikings and Greek gods, you'll like these books. Like, she doesn't do, like, paranormal romance where it's hugely problematic and the plot's all about, like, people not communicating well with each other. Like, these characters are amazing to read about, and they have healthy relationships. And when they don't have healthy relationships, they're called out on their bullshit and the fact that they're not having healthy relationships because they can't communicate, and it's a problem with them, and not, like, blaming it on the woman in the relationship or whatever other trash that happens all the time with unhealthy relationships. But yes, if you have not read Deidre Drake's books, do it now. The next book that I read was the one audiobook I had this month, which was the original by Brandon Sanderson and Mary... I want to say it's Mary Robertson, but I could be completely wrong with her last name. This is available right now in audiobook only. You can't get this as like a physical set down read book, and it's a novella, it's short, but it was so amazing. I love Sanderson, and the one thing that I thought that Mary added really well to Sanderson's writing style was the inclusion of like LGBTQ and like characters, which you don't see really in any brand or in any Sanderson's work, because that's just not his particular like realm of writing. Like, it's okay if you're a straight man to not write LGBTQ characters well and to exclude them from your book. It's not like he's saying there's something wrong with them, he's just saying like he doesn't have the life experience to write characters like that, and that's why her addition to the book brought that aspect, and I very much enjoyed it. And this is a science fiction book about basically a woman who is a clone, and her original killed her husband, and the government had created her clone to hunt her original down and then bring her to justice for the murder of her husband. And the final book in my Just Because section was Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, which this is the first book in the newest trilogy, sub-series, whatever we're gonna call it, in the Shadowhunter world. This is, what is it, the Last Hours trilogy. This takes place in Victorian England, I guess, after, it's like the children of the like Clockwork characters. And that, the Clockwork so far was my favorite series. I like the Clockwork books much better than I like the original Shadowhunter books. And so I enjoyed this continuation of like the Clockwork, what is the word I'm looking for? Generation, or like the generation after the Clockwork ones. The original Shadowhunter series, for those few of you who don't know, Cassandra Clare's writing is modern, and so this is Victorian England, and then the other Shadowhunter books are modern. It's kind of hard to get what this is into because it's like deep within the Shadowhunter world. Basically, Shadowhunters are half angel, half human, and they are kind of like the policing force who keeps demons like out of the regular world, and then they also police underworlders who are like warlocks, werewolves, vampires, fairies, things like that. Even though the underworld like people really don't like the Shadowhunters because the Shadowhunters act like they're better than them. Like, imagine a police force that acts like they're better than other people. Who would have thought? Never happens. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It is a bit confusing with the sheer amount of characters though. I did manage to get an advanced reader copy in audio format of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. This is the author of Aragon, which was the dragon book that he wrote that series when he was like 12 or something like that. I don't know. He was very young. He wrote a fantasy series for young adults called Aragon about dragons. I felt that series was extremely mediocre, but my sister loved it. It's one of her favorite book series, so that was maybe just me. This is his first adult novel that he's released, and he's like my age, so he's definitely adult, and this is an adult sci-fi. This is space opera sci-fi. People are traveling through the cosmos, and it's aliens and a completely different universe and everything like that. I ended up getting this as an audiobook, even though I don't typically like reading this kind of book as an audiobook. I just get auto approval from Macmillan Audio, so I got this audiobook early. Anyway, I thought it was okay. It was like 800 something pages, and it could have definitely used some editorial trimming to it. A lot of very, very boring passages were repeated over and over and over. Like, the main character had something wrong with her where she couldn't go into cryo sleep, and she would be the only person awake for like 6 months at a time traveling through space because all the other passengers are in cryo sleep. And most of the time she like napped and tried to sleep as much as possible, but she wasn't in like a full cryogenic sleep. Reading about that once is acceptable. Having to read that same story 3 different times, I was like, I don't care. Like, we know she can't sleep in cryo sleep. You are not telling us anything new. So I was very, like, bored with that. Overall, like I said, it was mediocre. The first half of the book was really good, and then it just kind of like went downhill from there. It's like the build-up was amazing, and I was so interested in that story, and then once we got to like the peak, where we're gonna start into like the resolution part, and I was just like, oh, no, this isn't the story I wanted. No, I'm good. But I think a lot of people will like it. Maybe it's just me and I don't particularly care for Paulini's writing style, and I kind of knew that going into this. So there you go. Take my review of this with a grain of salt. The next book that I read was Queen of the Conquered by Kaysen Callender, and the problem with this one, or I'm sorry, this is a fantasy. I'm gonna say it's an adult fantasy. It is a fantasy world that is supposed to remind the reader of the Caribbean islands during the peak of the slave trade, where the ruling class on these islands are white people who have enslaved people of color, specifically people who resemble, in this fantasy world, people of African descent. Like, it's a fantasy world, so it's not actually the Caribbean islands, but like when you read it, you're supposed to be like, oh, this is inspired by the Caribbean islands during the slave trade. There is magic in this universe, which kind of like makes it more fantasy, and then it's not. It's like, it's not called the Caribbean. Like, when she travels north to the continent, it is not the United States of America, but that was it's supposed to like resemble. The main character is a black woman who has the power of a white slave owner. She is from a family that has managed to elevate themselves to like the slave owner powerful ruling class, even though she is a person of color. She has a magical ability, which she's supposed to be the only black person with this magical ability because only rulers, like the ruling class, are allowed to have it, so anybody who is a slave who has this is murdered. And because she's not a slave, she can't be murdered. She's also the only person in her family left. Like literally the only living person in her entire family. Her magic ability is to read minds, so she can read anybody's thoughts fairly easily. She has to like focus on people's thoughts, but she can kind of like feel like strong emotion, but if she really wants to read thoughts, she has to like focus on reading that person's thoughts, but it's very easy for her to read thoughts. So the problem with this is reading thoughts should create an empathetic character, and this woman is the most unlikable character, and she has no idea what's going on. Like, she reads people's thoughts and she has no idea what the fuck is going on around her. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Also, the ruling class in this like universe seem to have absolutely no problem killing each other off. Like, white on white crime, like no one's investigating this shit. Like, as long as you can be a tiny bit sneaky about it, you don't even have to really try. Like, even like the vaguest sense of don't like actively murder somebody while they're in the same room as you, like you can get away with murdering anybody. And how this woman of color is alive when everybody hates her doesn't make sense. Or even why she still has power. Like, there's nothing that says that just because her family got elevated to this, like, higher class, that any of these people have to allow her to stay in power. And she has no power to stop them from murdering her or for taking away her, like, benefits. Like, because she's a black woman, all of these people can just instantly kill her, and there's not any, like, no one's gonna do anything about it. Like, they all hate her, and she's by herself. So that fact that she, like, in this society is still alive, and everybody hates her, and everybody tries to kill her, but they're just like, oh no, I can't kill her. It's not allowed because she's the ruling class, but they're going over and, like, killing all the other people in the same ruling class. Like, it doesn't make sense at all. Like, I was completely unable to suspend my disbelief reading the story that the events of the story would have actually played out the way that they did. Like, completely incapable. And I think that for Case and Calendar, I need to stick to their contemporary writing, and maybe this fantasy just wasn't for me. But yeah, I really did not like the story in this. And it's not that, like, the portrayal of black characters and everything like that was done amazing in this book, and the horrors of slavery and everything like that was done amazing in this book. Like, all of that part of the book was so good, but I just couldn't buy the story. Like, the story didn't make any sense at all, period, whatsoever. Like, complete nonsensical. So that was my only problem with the book. And it made me not like it, but as far as, like, the actual, like, book goes, like, the other stuff in the book, the non-fantasy aspects of the book, like, all of that, good. All right, and my next and largest section was the buzzwordathon, and I read 14 books in a week for the buzzwordathon. I do have an entire vlog dedicated just to the buzzwordathon, and, like, it's a vlog and then there's a wrap up at the end and all this stuff. Actually, it's a 2-part vlog. I'll just link the first part of that vlog up there. I will go over just the individual books really quick without saying anything about them, because that was an entire vlog and not just a wrap up. So the theme of the buzzwordathon this time was to read books that contained the word night in the title. And so I read Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights by Asiris Parker, and this is a standalone poetry collection. Then I read Nightmare by Chad Nicholas, which is a horror book, and this just now released. So if you're interested in reading this, it is, like, less than a week ago became available on Amazon for purchase if you're interested. I guess I should interrupt myself here to say that, like, the first 7 books of this that I read were arcs, so some of them are not released yet. Obviously, Coffee Days, Whiskey Nights, and then Nightmare are both out. The rest of them I'm not entirely sure if they're out or not. Next, I read Midnight Wings by Ariel Sealing, and this was a Cinderella retelling in a sci-fi setting. After that, I read The Knight's Daughter, and this is a very generic fantasy, like, knights, whatever, like, knights, fairies, elves, a dark one, a chosen one, like, super generic, regular fantasy story. This is by S.H. Cooper. After that, I read Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, 100 Immigrant Women Who Changed the World by Elena Favilli, I believe is her last name, and this is a children's like picture book that is targeted towards young girls who need role models, because little girls need role models too. Next, I read Dark Days, Bright Nights, Surviving the Las Vegas Storm Drains by Matthew O'Brien, and this is a nonfiction story about basically living underground in Las Vegas, living in the storm drains of Las Vegas. So for some reason in this section, I tracked this book in my statistics. I just forgot to mention it in this section, so I'm tossing this in here really quick. I read The Night and the Land by Matt Spencer, and I did not like this book. This was a urban fantasy. This was an urban fantasy book. I did not like it. There's a lot of problems with racism in here, so I'm gonna say hard pass on this one for pretty much everybody. Now, the remaining 7 books that I read for this challenge, I read in a 24-hour reading challenge, and they are very old, definitely released books. And all of these books were the first 7 books in the House of Night series. So it's Marked, Betrayed, Chosen, Untamed, Haunted, Burned, and the ebook that I read is called, wait. The ebook that I read is called Tempted. So these obviously do not have knights in, or the word knight in their individual titles, but the series is the House of Night series. So there you go. And that is all 30 books that I read this month. Holy crap, that was so many books. But thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.